Well, where to start? I'm afraid I only have 5 minutes, so I can't cover all the points I'd like to. And I think what you've seen is a very effective demonstration by two former federal prosecutors with evidence skills, including the same kinds of trial techniques you would see in a courtroom with whiteboard quotations that only selectively quote very extensive documents, and it's very difficult for me to respond in 5 minutes. I'm going to try to do some things quickly, but I'm not going to be able to get to everything, I'm afraid. The first thing one ought to remember is that things look very different now in 2009 than they did in 2001 and 2002. In 2001 and 2002, 3,000 of our fellow citizens had been killed in a deliberate attack by a foreign enemy on New York City and Washington, D.C. That forced us in the government to have to consider measures to gain information to fulfill the president's highest constitutional duty, which is to protect the country from attack. It's not things that the people in the government devised because they came into office wanting to ever have to think about any of these questions. These were things that were forced on the government by necessity. Now, from what I hear from Professor Garman, Professor Rosenthal, that they would, in the same circumstance, completely rule out any forms of coercive interrogation, no matter who we held, including to and up to Osama bin Laden, no matter what the circumstances, even if we thought that there were pending attacks on the United States, right? Because according to them, the statute has to be read in all circumstances to bind the president's hands, no matter how exigent the circumstances. That's a question of policy and law. And one thing I want to say also is that the memos are about legal interpretation. They're not about policy. They don't urge the policymakers to take any particular course of action. They're quite upfront about that. But it should be clear that people on both sides of the political spectrum have different views about this. Bill Clinton and John McCain, who've been cited, are both on public record saying that if they thought there was a bomb in a major American city, they would authorize a president to do whatever was necessary, in their words, or whatever it took to get information from a terrorist leader to stop the attack. Admiral Blair, the new head of the intelligence agencies, and Leon Panetta, the head of the CIA, have said that if necessary, they would go and get authorization from the president in a similar circumstance, but they would not have this sort of blanket rule that some people would have. Academics, some very liberal, like Alan Dershowitz at Harvard, or Phil Bobbitt at Columbia, have also said that depending on the circumstances, they too would endorse coercive interrogation methods. So I was put with a question at the end of Larry's talk about whether I would call on a commission, and if I didn't, I'd have to shut up, which is a very strange choice to have to make. I'm not going to endorse it in a commission, and I guess I can't stop talking now, so I suppose I can't shut up either. But what I would say is, do you really believe that in those kind of situations, and I'm afraid they're not law school hypotheticals anymore, I'm afraid that because of the 9/11 attack, we were confronted with situations where we thought that there were exigent circumstances where we thought Al-Qaeda in the months after 9/11 was going to carry out follow-on attacks on our country and its citizens. If you had those kinds of concerns, if you thought those were the factual circumstances, you would actually say, I'm unwilling to consider anything but reading them their Miranda rights and asking them polite questions once their lawyer got there. Another point I'd like to make is, apart from this, we could get into a long debate about, were the memos selective or not, selective in their quotations, use of evidence, and so on. One thing I would say is that one ought to read all the memos. And sure, there's no discussion of the Keith case, for example, in this memo. I don't agree with Larry's reading of the Keith case. The Keith case specifically does not reach the question of what kind of requirements are necessary for searches to protect against foreign threats to national security. But there are other memos from OLC in this exact time period which discuss this issue extensively. And to try to portray by just focusing on this and not looking at all the OLC memos, I think is unfair. Also, one doesn't hear about what the Clinton administration did. The Clinton administration which engaged, as we know, in rendition, and whose former alumni will not answer questions in congressional testimony about it. The Clinton administration also refused to cite Youngstown or to follow it in areas where Congress tried to restrict the commander-in-chief power, most notably in the war in Kosovo, most notably in any kinds of regulations the commander-in-chief laws. So one last thing I'll say is, was it worth it? Well, we haven't had an attack in more than 7 years. The head of the CIA said that 50% of the information we had on Al-Qaeda and its workings came from interrogation of their leaders. Don't take my word for it. Take a look at the 9/11 Commission report and see where almost all the evidence comes from about how Al-Qaeda was able to succeed on 9/11 and carry through on its threats to attack us as they so devastatingly did on that day. Thank you.